Part III of Book II of On the Nature of the Gods, by Marcus Tullius Cicero, translated by Charles Duke Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. I will here, says Balbus, looking at me, make use of the verses which, when you were young, you translated from Aratos, and which, because they are in Latin, gave me so much delight that I have many of them still in my memory. As then we daily see, without any change or variation, "the rest swiftly pursue the course to which they're bound, and with the heavens the days and nights go round," the contemplation of which to a mind desirous of observing the constancy of nature is inexhaustible. "The extreme top of either point is called the pole." About this the two arctoi are turned which never set. "Of these the Greeks one Cynosura call, the other Helici." The brightest stars, indeed, of Helici are discernible all night, "which are by us Septentriones called." Cynosura moves about the same pole with a like number of stars, and ranged in the same order. "This the Phoenicians choose to make their guide when on the ocean in the night they ride. Adorned with stars of more refulgent light, the other shines, the first appears at night. Though this is small, sailors its use have found, more inward is its course, and short its round." The aspect of those stars is the more admirable because "the dragon grim between them bends his way, as through the winding banks the currents stray, and up and down in sinuous bending rolls." His whole form is excellent, but the shape of his head and the ardour of his eyes are most remarkable. "Various the stars which deck his glittering head, his temples are with double glory spread. From his fierce eyes two fervid lights afar flash, and his chin shines with one radiant star. Bowed is his head, and his round neck he bends, and to the tail of Helici extends." The rest of the dragon's body we see at every hour in the night. "Here suddenly the head a little hides itself, where all its parts which are in sight, and those unseen in the same place, unite." Near to this head "is placed the figure of a man that moves, weary and sad," which the Greeks "Engonaces do call, because he's borne about with bended knee. Near him is placed the crown with a refulgent lustre graced." This indeed is at his back, but Anguitenens, the snake holder, is near his head. "The Greeks him Ophiuchus call, renowned the name. He strongly grasps the serpent round with both his hands, himself the serpent folds beneath his breast, and round his middle holds; yet gravely he, bright shining in the skies, moves on, and treads on Nepa's breast and eyes." The Septentriones are followed by "Arctophylax, that's said to be the same, which we Bootes call, who has the name, because he drives the greater bear along, yoked to a wain." Besides, in Bootes, "a star of glittering rays about his waist, Arcturus called, a name renowned is placed." beneath which is "the Virgin of illustrious form, whose hand holds a bright spike." And truly these signs are so regularly disposed that a divine wisdom evidently appears in them. "Beneath the bear's head have the twins their seat, under his chest the crab, beneath his feet the mighty lion darts a trembling flame." The charioteer. "On the left side of Gemini we see, and at his head behold fierce Helice. On his left shoulder the bright goat appears." But to proceed, "This is indeed a great and glorious star. On the other side the kids, inferior far, yield but a slender light to mortal eyes." Under his feet "the horned bull with sturdy limbs is placed." His head is spangled with a number of stars. "These by the Greeks are called the Hyades." From reigning, for οὐεν is to reign; therefore they are injudiciously called Suculi by our people, as if they had their name from ous, a sow, and not from οὐα. Behind the lesser bear, Cepheus follows with extended hands, "for close behind the lesser bear he comes." Before him goes "Cassiopeia with a faintish light, but near her moves fair and illustrious sight, Andromeda, who, with an eager pace, seems to avoid her parent's mournful face. With glittering mane the horse now seems to tread, so near he comes on her refulgent head, with a fair star that close to him appears, a double form, and but one light he wears, by which he seems ambitious in the sky, an everlasting knot of stars to tie. Near him the ram with wreathed horns is placed." By whom "the fishes are, of which one seems to haste somewhat before the other, to the blast of the north wind exposed." Perseus is described as placed at the feet of Andromeda, "and him the sharp blasts of the north wind beat. Near his left knee, but dim their light, their seat the small Pleiades maintain. We find not far from them the lyre, but slightly joined. Next is the winged bird that seems to fly beneath the spacious covering of the sky." Near the head of the horse lies the right hand of Aquarius, then all Aquarius himself. "Then Capricorn, with half the form of beast, breathes chill and piercing colds from his strong breast, and in a spacious circle takes his round. When him, while in the winter solstice bound, the sun has visited with constant light, he turns his course, and shorter makes the night." Not far from hence is seen "the scorpion rising lofty from below, by him the archer with his bended bow, near him the bird with gaudy feathers spread, and the fierce eagle hovers o'er his head." Next comes the dolphin, "then bright Orion, who obliquely moves." He is followed by "the fervent dog, bright with refulgent stars." Next the hare follows, "unwearied in his course, at the dog's tail Argo moves on, and moving seems to sail. O'er her the ram and fishes have their place, the illustrious vessel touches in her pace the river's banks." which you may see winding and extending itself to a great length. The fetters at the fishes' tails are hung. By Nepa's head, behold, the altar stand, which by the breath of southern winds is fanned. Near which the centaur hastens his mingled parts to join beneath the serpent, there extending his right hand, to where you see the monstrous scorpion stand, which he at the bright altar fiercely slays. Here on her lower parts see Hydra raise herself, whose bulk is very far extended. Amid the winding of her body is placed the shining goblet, and the glossy crow plunges his beak into her parts below. Antecanis beneath the twins is seen, called Procyon by the Greeks. Can any one in his senses imagine that this disposition of the stars, and this heaven so beautifully adorned, could ever have been formed by a fortuitous concourse of atoms? Or what other nature, being destitute of intellect and reason, could possibly have produced these effects, which not only require reason to bring them about, but the very character of which could not be understood and appreciated without the most strenuous exertions of well-directed reason? But our admiration is not limited to the objects here described. What is most wonderful is, that the world is so durable and so perfectly made for lasting, that it is not to be impaired by time. For all its parts tend equally to the centre, and are bound together by a sort of chain which surrounds the elements. This chain is nature, which, being diffused through the universe, and performing all things with judgment and reason, attracts the extremities to the centre. If then the world is round, and if on that account all its parts, being of equal dimensions and relative proportions, mutually support and are supported by one another, it must follow that as all the parts incline to the centre, for that is the lowest place of a globe, there is nothing whatever which can put a stop to that propensity in the case of such great weights. For the same reason, though the sea is higher than the earth, yet because it has the like tendency, it is collected everywhere, equally concenters, and never overflows, and is never wasted. The air, which is contiguous, ascends by its lightness, but diffuses itself through the whole. Therefore it is by nature joined and united to the sea, and at the same time borne by the same power towards the heaven, by the thinness and heat of which it is so tempered as to be made proper to supply life and wholesome air for the support of animated beings. This is encompassed by the highest region of the heavens, which is called the sky, which is joined to the extremity of the air, but retains its own heat, pure and unmixed. The stars have their revolutions in the sky, and are continued by the tendency of all parts towards the centre. Their duration is perpetuated by their form and figure, for they are round, which form, as I think has been before observed, is the least liable to injury; and as they are composed of fire, they are fed by the vapours which are exhaled by the sun from the earth, the sea, and other waters. But when these vapours have nourished and refreshed the stars and the whole sky, they are sent back to be exhaled again, so that very little is lost or consumed by the fire of the stars and the flame of the sky. Hence we Stoics conclude, which Panaetius is said to have doubted of, that the whole world at last would be consumed by a general conflagration, when all moisture being exhausted, neither the earth could have any nourishment, nor the air return again, since water, of which it is formed, would then be all consumed, so that only fire would subsist; and from this fire, which is an animating power and a deity, a new world would arise, and be re established in the same beauty. I should be sorry to appear to you to dwell too long upon this subject of the stars, and more especially upon that of the planets, whose motions, though different, make a very just agreement. Saturn, the highest, chills; Mars, placed in the middle, burns; while Jupiter, interposing, moderates their excess both of light and heat. The two planets beneath Mars obey the sun. The sun himself fills the whole universe with his own genial light, and the moon, illuminated by him, influences conception, birth, and maturity. And who is there who is not moved by this union of things, and by this concurrence of nature agreeing together, as it were, for the safety of the world? And yet I feel sure that none of these reflections have ever been made by these men. Let us proceed from celestial to terrestrial things. What is there in them which does not prove the principle of an intelligent nature? First, as to vegetables, they have roots to sustain their stems, and to draw from the earth a nourishing moisture to support the vital principle which those roots contain. They are clothed with a rind or bark to secure them more thoroughly from heat and cold. The vines we see take hold on props with their tendrils, as if with hands, and raise themselves as if they were animated. It is even said that they shun cabbages and coleworts as noxious and pestilential to them, and, if planted by them, will not touch any part. But what a vast variety is there of animals! And how wonderfully is every kind adapted to preserve itself! Some are covered with hides, some clothed with fleeces, and some guarded with bristles. Some are sheltered with feathers, some with scales. Some are armed with horns, and some are furnished with wings to escape from danger. Nature hath also liberally and plentifully provided for all animals their proper food. I could expatiate on the judicious and curious formation and disposition of their bodies for the reception and digestion of it, for all their interior parts are so framed and disposed that there is nothing superfluous, nothing that is not necessary for the preservation of life. Besides, nature has also given these beasts appetite and sense, in order that, by the one, they may be excited to procure sufficient sustenance, and by the other they may distinguish what is noxious from what is salutary. Some animals seek their food walking, some creeping, some flying, and some swimming. Some take it with their mouth and teeth, some seize it with their claws, and some with their beaks. Some suck, some graze, some bolt it whole, and some chew it. Some are so low that they can with ease take such food as is to be found on the ground; but the taller, as geese, swans, cranes, and camels, are assisted by a length of neck. To the elephant is given a hand, without which, from his unwieldiness of body, he would scarce have any means of attaining food. But to those beasts which live by preying on others, nature has given either strength or swiftness. On some animals she has even bestowed artifice and cunning, as on spiders, some of which weave a sort of net to entrap and destroy whatever falls into it; others sit on the watch unobserved to fall on their prey and devour it. The naker, by the Greeks called pinna, has a kind of confederacy with the prawn for procuring food. It has two large shells, open, into which, when the little fishes swim, the naker, having notice given by the bite of the prawn, closes them immediately. Thus these little animals, though of different kinds, seek their food in common, in which it is matter of wonder whether they associate by any agreement, or are naturally joined together from their beginning. There is some cause to admire also the provision of nature in the case of those aquatic animals which are generated on land, such as crocodiles, river tortoises, and a certain kind of serpents, which seek the water as soon as they are able to drag themselves along. We frequently put duck eggs under hens, by which, as by their true mothers, the ducklings are at first hatched and nourished; but when they see the water, they forsake them, and run to it as to their natural abode. So strong is the impression of nature in animals for their own preservation. I have read that there is a bird called Platylea, the shoveler, that lives by watching those fowls which dive into the sea for their prey, and when they return with it, he squeezes their heads with his beak till they drop it, and then seizes on it himself. It is said likewise that he is in the habit of filling his stomach with shellfish, and when they are digested by the heat which exists in the stomach, they cast them up, and then pick out what is proper nourishment. The sea frogs, they say, are wont to cover themselves with sand, and, moving near the water, the fishes strike at them as at a bait, and are themselves taken and devoured by the frogs. Between the kite and the crow there is a kind of natural war, and wherever the one finds the eggs of the other, he breaks them. But who is there who can avoid being struck with the wonder at that which has been noticed by Aristotle, who has enriched us with so many valuable remarks? When the cranes pass the sea in search of warmer climes, they fly in the form of a triangle. By the first angle they repel the resisting air. On each side their wings serve as oars to facilitate their flight, and the basis of their triangle is assisted by the wind in their stern. Those which are behind rest their necks and heads on those which precede, and as the leader has not the same relief, because he has none to lean upon, he, at length, flies behind that he may also rest, while one of those which have been eased succeeds him, and through the whole flight each regularly takes his turn. I could produce many instances of this kind, but these may suffice. Let us now proceed to things more familiar to us. The care of beasts for their own preservation, their circumspection while feeding, and their manner of taking rest in their lairs are generally known, but still they are greatly to be admired. Dogs cure themselves by a vomit. The Egyptian ibis by a purge, from whence physicians have lately, I mean but few ages since, greatly improved their art. It is reported that panthers, which in barbarous countries are taken with poisoned flesh, have a certain remedy that preserves them from dying, and that in Crete the wild goats, when they are wounded with poisoned arrows, seek for an herb called dittany, which, when they have tasted, the arrows, they say, drop from their bodies. It is said also that deer, before they fawn, purge themselves with a little herb called hartswort. Beasts, when they receive any hurt, or fear it, have recourse to their natural arms, the bull to his horns, the boar to his tusks, and the lion to his teeth. Some take to flight, others hide themselves. The cuttlefish vomits blood, the crampfish benumbs, and there are many animals that, by their intolerable stink, oblige their pursuers to retire. But that the beauty of the world might be eternal, great care has been taken by the providence of the Gods to perpetuate the different kinds of animals, and vegetables, and trees, and all those things which sink deep into the earth, and are contained in it by their roots and trunks, in order to which every individual has within itself such fertile seed that many are generated from one. And in vegetables this seed is enclosed in the heart of their fruit, but in such abundance that men may plentifully feed on it, and the earth be always replanted. With regard to animals, do we not see how aptly they are formed for the propagation of their species? Nature for this end created some males and some females. Their parts are perfectly framed for generation, and they have a wonderful propensity to copulation. When the seed has fallen on the matrix, it draws almost all the nourishment to itself, by which the fetus is formed; but as soon as it is discharged from thence, if it is an animal that is nourished by milk, almost all the food of the mother turns into milk, and the animal, without any direction, but by the pure instinct of nature, immediately hunts for the teat, and is there fed with plenty. What makes it evidently appear that there is nothing in this fortuitous, but the work of a wise and foreseeing nature, is, that those females which bring forth many young, as sows and bitches, have many teats, and those which bear a small number have but few. What tenderness do beasts show in preserving and raising up their young till they are able to defend themselves! They say, indeed, that fish, when they have spawned, leave their eggs, but the water easily supports them, and produces the young fry in abundance. It is said likewise that tortoises and crocodiles, when they have laid their eggs on the land, only cover them with earth, and then leave them, so that their young are hatched and brought up without assistance. But fowls and other birds seek for quiet places to lay in, where they build their nests in the softest manner, for the surest preservation of their eggs, which, when they have hatched, they defend from the cold by the warmth of their wings, or screen them from the sultry heat of the sun. When their young begin to be able to use their wings, they attend and instruct them, and then their cares are at an end. Human art and industry are indeed necessary towards the preservation and improvement of certain animals and vegetables; for there are several of both kinds which would perish without that assistance. There are likewise innumerable facilities, being different in different places, supplied to man to aid him in his civilization, and in procuring abundantly what he requires. The Nile waters Egypt, and after having overflowed and covered it the whole summer, it retires and leaves the fields softened and manured for the reception of seed. The Euphrates fertilizes Mesopotamia, into which, as we may say, it carries yearly new fields. The Indus, which is the largest of all rivers, not only improves and cultivates the ground, but sows it also, for it is said to carry with it a great quantity of grain. I could mention many other countries remarkable for something singular, and many fields which are, in their own natures, exceedingly fertile. But how bountiful is nature, that has provided for us such an abundance of various and delicious food, and this varying with the different seasons, so that we may be constantly pleased with change, and satisfied with abundance! How seasonable and useful to man, to beasts, and even to vegetables, are the Etesian winds she has bestowed, which moderate intemperate heat, and render navigation more sure and speedy! Many things must be omitted on a subject so copious, and still a great deal must be said. For it is impossible to relate the great utility of rivers, the flux and reflux of the sea, the mountains clothed with grass and trees, the salt pits remote from the sea coasts, the earth replete with salutary medicines, or, in short, the innumerable designs of nature necessary for sustenance and the enjoyment of life. We must not forget the vicissitudes of day and night, ordained for the health of animated beings, giving them a time to labor and a time to rest. Thus, if we every way examine the universe, it is apparent, from the greatest reason, that the whole is admirably governed by a divine providence for the safety and preservation of all beings. If it should be asked for whose sake this mighty fabric was raised Shall we say for trees and other vegetables, which, though destitute of sense, are supported by nature? That would be absurd. Is it for beasts? Nothing can be less probable than that the Gods should have taken such pains for beings void of speech and understanding. For whom, then, will any one presume to say that the world was made? Undoubtedly for reasonable beings. These are the Gods and men, who are certainly the most perfect of all beings, as nothing is equal to reason. It is therefore credible that the universe and all things in it were made for the Gods and for men. But we may yet more easily comprehend that the Gods have taken great care of the interests and welfare of men, if we examine thoroughly into the structure of the body, and the form and perfection of human nature. There are three things absolutely necessary for the support of life: to eat, to drink, and to breathe. For these operations the mouth is most aptly framed, which, by the assistance of the nostrils, draws in the more air. The teeth are there placed to divide and grind the food. The foreteeth, being sharp and opposite to each other, cut it asunder, and the hind teeth, called the grinders, chew it, in which office the tongue seems to assist. At the root of the tongue is the gullet, which receives whatever is swallowed. It touches the tonsils on each side, and terminates at the interior extremity of the palate. When, by the motions of the tongue, the food is forced into this passage, it descends, and those parts of the gullet which are below it are dilated, and those above are contracted. There is another passage, called by physicians the rough artery, which reaches to the lungs for the entrance and return of the air we breathe. And as its orifice is joined to the roots of the tongue a little above the part to which the gullet is annexed, it is furnished with a sort of coverlid, lest, by the accidental falling of any food into it, the respiration should be stopped. As the stomach, which is beneath the gullet, receives the meat and drink, so the lungs and the heart draw in the air from without. The stomach is wonderfully composed, consisting almost wholly of nerves. It abounds with membranes and fibres, and detains what it receives, whether solid or liquid, till it is altered and digested. It sometimes contracts, sometimes dilates. It blends and mixes the food together, so that it is easily concocted and digested by its force of heat, and by the animal spirits is distributed into the other parts of the body. As to the lungs, they are of a soft and spongy substance, which renders them the most commodious for respiration. They alternately dilate and contract to receive and return the air, that what is the chief animal sustenance may be always fresh. The juice by which we are nourished, being separated from the rest of the food, passes the stomach and intestines to the liver, through open and direct passages, which lead from the mesentery to the gates of the liver, for so they call those vessels at the entrance of it. There are other passages from thence through which the food has its course, when it has passed the liver. When the bile and those humours which proceed from the kidneys are separated from the food, the remaining part turns to blood, and flows to those vessels at the entrance of the liver, to which all the passages adjoin. The chyle, being conveyed from this place through them into the vessel called the hollow vein, is mixed together, and, being already digested and distilled, passes into the heart, and from the heart it is communicated through a great number of veins to every part of the body. It is not difficult to describe how the gross remains are detruded by the motion of the intestines, which contract and dilate, but that must be declined as too indelicate for discourse. Let us rather explain that other wonder of nature, the air, which is drawn into the lungs, receives heat, both by that already in, and by the coagitation of the lungs. One part is turned back by respiration, and the other is received into a place called the ventricle of the heart. There is another ventricle like it and next to the heart, into which the blood flows from the liver through the hollow vein. Thus, by one ventricle the blood is diffused to the extremities through the veins, and by the other the breath is communicated through the arteries. And there are such numbers of both dispersed through the whole body, that they manifest a divine art. Why need I speak of the bones, those supports of the body whose joints are so wonderfully contrived for stability and to render the limbs complete with regard to motion and to every action of the body? Or need I mention the nerves by which the limbs are governed, their many interweavings, and their proceeding from the heart, from whence, like the veins and arteries, they have their origin, and are distributed through the whole corporeal frame? To this skill of nature, and this care of Providence, so diligent and so ingenious, many reflections may be added, which show what valuable things the Deity has bestowed on man. He has made us of a stature tall and upright, in order that we might behold the heavens, and so arrive at the knowledge of the Gods. For men are not simply to dwell here as inhabitants of the earth, but to be, as it were, spectators of the heavens and the stars, which is a privilege not granted to any other kind of animated beings. The senses, which are the interpreters and messengers of things, are placed in the head, as in a tower, and wonderfully situated for their proper uses. For the eyes, being in the highest part, have the office of sentinels, in discovering to us objects, and the ears are conveniently placed in a high part of the person, being appointed to receive sound, which naturally ascends. The nostrils have the like situation, because all scent likewise ascends, and they have with great reason a near vicinity to the mouth, because they assist us in judging of meat and drink. The taste, which is to distinguish the quality of what we take, is in that part of the mouth where nature has laid open a passage for what we eat and drink. But the touch is equally diffused through the whole body, that we may not receive any blows, or the too rigid attacks of cold and heat, without feeling them. And as in building the architect averts from the eyes and nose of the master those things which must necessarily be offensive, so has nature removed far from our senses what is of the same kind in the human body. What artificer but nature, whose direction is incomparable, could have exhibited so much ingenuity in the formation of the senses? In the first place, she has covered and invested the eyes with the finest membranes, which she hath made transparent, that we may see through them, and firm in their texture to preserve the eyes. She has made them slippery and movable, that they might avoid what would offend them, and easily direct the sight wherever they will. The actual organ of sight, which is called the pupil, is so small that it can easily shun whatever might be hurtful to it. The eyelids, which are their coverings, are soft and smooth, that they may not injure the eyes, and are made to shut at the apprehension of any accident, or to open at pleasure, and these movements nature has ordained to be made in an instant. They are fortified with a sort of palisade of hairs, to keep off what may be noxious to them when open, and to be a fence to their repose when sleep closes them, and allows them to rest as if they were wrapped up in a case. Besides, they are commodiously hidden and defended by eminences on every side. For on the upper part the eyebrows turn aside the perspiration which falls from the head and forehead. The cheeks beneath rise a little so as to protect them on the lower side, and the nose is placed between them as a wall of separation. The hearing is always open, for that is a sense of which we are in need even while we are sleeping, and the moment that any sound is admitted by it, we are awakened even from sleep. It has a winding passage, lest anything should slip into it, as it might if it were straight and simple. Nature also hath taken the same precaution in making there a viscous humour, that if any little creatures should endeavour to creep in, they might stick in it as in bird‐lime. The ears, by which we mean the outward part, are made prominent to cover and preserve the hearing, lest the sound should be dissipated and escape before the sense is affected. Their entrances are hard and horny, and their form winding, because bodies of this kind better return and increase the sound. This appears in the harp, lute, or horn, and from all tortuous and enclosed places sounds are returned stronger. The nostrils, in like manner, are ever open, because we have a continual use for them, and their entrances also are rather narrow, lest anything noxious should enter them. And they have always a humidity necessary for the repelling dust and many other extraneous bodies. The taste, having the mouth for an enclosure, is admirably situated both in regard to the use we make of it and to its security. Besides, every human sense is much more exquisite than those of brutes; for our eyes, in those arts which come under their judgment, distinguish with great nicety, as in painting, sculpture, engraving, and in the gesture and motion of bodies. They understand the beauty, proportion, and, as I may so term it, the becomingness of colours and figures. They distinguish things of greater importance, even virtues and vices. They know whether a man is angry or calm, cheerful or sad, courageous or cowardly, bold or timorous. The judgment of the ears is not less admirably and scientifically contrived with regard to vocal and instrumental music. They distinguish the variety of sounds, the measure, the stops, the different sorts of voices, the treble and the bass, the soft and the harsh, the sharp and the flat, of which human ears only are capable to judge. There is likewise great judgment in the smell, the taste, and the touch. To indulge and gratify which senses, more arts have been invented than I could wish. It is apparent to what excess we have arrived in the composition of our perfumes, the preparation of our food, and the enjoyment of corporeal pleasures. Again, he who does not perceive the soul and mind of man, his reason, prudence, and discernment, to be the work of a divine providence, seems himself to be destitute of those faculties. While I am on this subject, Cotta, I wish I had your eloquence. How would you illustrate so fine a subject? You would show the great extent of the understanding, how we collect our ideas, and join those which follow to those which precede, establish principles, draw consequences, define things separately, and comprehend them with accuracy, from whence you demonstrate how great is the power of intelligence and knowledge, which is such that even God himself has no qualities more admirable. How valuable, though you Academics despise and even deny that we have it, is our knowledge of exterior objects, from the perception of the senses joined to the application of the mind, by which we see in what relation one thing stands to another, and by the aid of which we have invented those arts which are necessary for the support and pleasure of life. How charming is eloquence! How divine that mistress of the universe, as you call it! It teaches us what we were ignorant of, and makes us capable of teaching what we have learned. By this we exhort others, by this we persuade them, by this we comfort the afflicted, by this we deliver the affrighted from their fear, by this we moderate excessive joy, by this we assuage the passions of lust and anger. This it is which bound men by the chains of right and law, formed the bonds of civil society, and made us quit a wild and savage life. And it will appear incredible, unless you carefully observe the facts, how complete the work of nature is in giving us the use of speech. For, first of all, there is an artery from the lungs to the bottom of the mouth, through which the voice, having its original principle in the mind, is transmitted. Then the tongue is placed in the mouth, bounded by the teeth. It softens and modulates the voice, which would otherwise be confusedly uttered, and by pushing it to the teeth and other parts of the mouth, makes the sound distinct and articulate. We Stoics, therefore, compare the tongue to the bow of an instrument, the teeth to the strings, and the nostrils to the sounding board. But how commodious are the hands which nature has given to man, and how beautifully do they minister to many arts! For such is the flexibility of the joints, that our fingers are closed and opened without any difficulty. With their help the hand is formed for painting, carving, and engraving, for playing on stringed instruments and on the pipe. These are matters of pleasure. There are also works of necessity, such as tilling the ground, building houses, making cloth and habits, and working in brass and iron. It is the business of the mind to invent, the senses to perceive, and the hands to execute; so that if we have buildings, if we are clothed, if we live in safety, if we have cities, walls, habitations, and temples, it is to the hands we owe them. By our labor, that is, by our hands, variety and plenty of food are provided. For without culture, many fruits, which serve either for present or future consumption, would not be produced. Besides, we feed on flesh, fish, and fowl, catching some, and bringing up others. We subdue four-footed beasts for our carriage, whose speed and strength supply our slowness and inability. On some we put burdens, on others yokes. We convert the sagacity of the elephant and the quick scent of the dog to our own advantage. Out of the caverns of the earth we dig iron, a thing entirely necessary for the cultivation of the ground. We discover the hidden veins of copper, silver, and gold, advantageous for our use, and beautiful as ornaments. We cut down trees, and use every kind of wild and cultivated timber, not only to make fire to warm us and dress our meat, but also for building, that we may have houses to defend us from the heat and cold. With timber, likewise, we build ships, which bring us from all parts every commodity of life. We are the only animals who, from our knowledge of navigation, can manage what nature has made the most violent, the sea and the winds. Thus we obtain from the ocean great numbers of profitable things. We are the absolute masters of what the earth produces. We enjoy the mountains and the plains, the rivers and the lakes are ours. We sow the seed and plant the trees. We fertilize the earth by overflowing it. We stop, direct, and turn the rivers. In short, by our hands we endeavor, by our various operations in this world, to make, as it were, another nature. But what shall I say of human reason? Has it not even entered the heavens? Man alone of all animals has observed the courses of the stars, their risings and settings. By man the day, the month, the year is determined. He foresees the eclipses of the sun and moon, and foretells them to futurity, marking their greatness, duration, and precise time. From the contemplation of these things the mind extracts the knowledge of the Gods, a knowledge which produces piety, with which is connected justice and all the other virtues, from which arises a life of felicity, inferior to that of the Gods in no single particular, except in immortality, which is not absolutely necessary to happy living. In explaining these things, I think that I have sufficiently demonstrated the superiority of man to other animated beings, from whence we should infer that neither the form and position of his limbs, nor that strength of mind and understanding, could possibly be the effect of chance. I am now to prove by way of conclusion that everything in this world of use to us was made designedly for us. First of all, the universe was made for the Gods and men, and all things therein were prepared and provided for our service. For the world is the common habitation or city of the Gods and men, for they are the only reasonable beings. They alone live by justice and law. As, therefore, it must be presumed the cities of Athens and Lacedaemon were built for the Athenians and Lacedaemonians, and as everything there is said to belong to those people, so everything in the universe may with propriety be said to belong to the Gods and men, and to them alone. In the next place, though the revolutions of the sun, moon, and all the stars are necessary for the cohesion of the universe, yet may they be considered also as objects designed for the view and contemplation of man. There is no sight less apt to satiate the eye, none more beautiful or more worthy to employ our reason and penetration. By measuring their courses, we find the different seasons, their durations and vicissitudes, which, if they are known to men alone, we must believe were made only for their sake. Does the earth bring forth fruit and grain in such excessive abundance and variety for men, or for brutes? The plentiful and exhilarating fruit of the vine and the olive tree are entirely useless to beasts. They know not the time for sowing, tilling, or for reaping in season and gathering in the fruits of the earth, or for laying up and preserving their stores. Man alone has the care and advantage of these things. Thus, as the lute and the pipe were made for those, and those only, who are capable of playing on them, so it must be allowed that the produce of the earth was designed for those only who make use of them. And though some beasts may rob us of a small part, it does not follow that the earth produced it also for them. Men do not store up corn for mice and ants, but for their wives, their children, and their families. Beasts, therefore, as I said before, possess it by stealth, but their masters openly and freely. It is for us, therefore, that nature hath provided this abundance. Can there be any doubt that this plenty and variety of fruit, which delight not only the taste, but the smell and sight, was by nature intended for man only? Beasts are so far from being partakers of this design, that we see that even they themselves were made for man. For of what utility would sheep be, unless for their wool, which, when dressed and woven, serves us for clothing? For they are not capable of anything, not even of procuring their own food, without the care and assistance of man. The fidelity of the dog, his affectionate fawning on his master, his aversion to strangers, his sagacity in finding game, and his vivacity in pursuit of it, what do these qualities denote, but that he was created for our use? Why need I mention oxen? We perceive that their backs were not formed for carrying burdens, but their necks were naturally made for the yoke, and their strong, broad shoulders to draw the plough. In the golden age, which poets speak of, they were so greatly beneficial to the husbandman in tilling the fallow ground, that no violence was ever offered them, and it was even thought a crime to eat them. The Iron Age began the fatal trade Of blood, and hammered the destructive blade. Then men began to make the ox to bleed, And on the tamed and docile beast to feed. It would take a long time to relate the advantages which we receive from mules and asses, which undoubtedly were designed for our use. What is the swine good for but to eat? Whose life, Chrysippus says, was given it but as salt to keep it from putrefying. And as it is proper food for man, nature hath made no animal more fruitful. what a multitude of birds and fishes are taken by the art and contrivance of man only, and which are so delicious to our taste, that one would be tempted sometimes to believe that this Providence which watches over us was an Epicurean. Though we think there are some birds, the alites and osins, as our augurs call them, which were made merely to foretell events. The large savage beasts we take by hunting, partly for food, partly to exercise ourselves in imitation of martial discipline, and to use those we can tame and instruct, as elephants, or to extract remedies for our diseases and wounds, as we do from certain roots and herbs, the virtues of which are known by long use and experience. Represent to yourself the whole earth and seas as if before your eyes. You will see the vast and fertile plains, the thick, shady mountains, the immense pasturage for cattle, and ships sailing over the deep with incredible celerity. Nor are our discoveries only on the face of the earth, but in its secret recesses there are many useful things, which, being made for man, by man alone, are discovered. Another, and in my opinion the strongest proof that the providence of the Gods takes care of us, is divination, which both of you perhaps will attack. You, Cotta, because Carneades took pleasure in inveighing against the Stoics, and you, Velleius, because there is nothing Epicurus ridicules so much as the prediction of events. Yet the truth of divination appears in many places, on many occasions, often in private, but particularly in public concerns. We receive many intimations from the foresight and presages of augurs and auspices, from oracles, prophecies, dreams, and prodigies; and it often happens that by these means events have proved happy to men, and imminent dangers have been avoided. This knowledge, therefore, call it either a kind of transport, or an art, or a natural faculty, is certainly found only in men, and is a gift from the immortal Gods. If these proofs, when taken separately, should make no impression upon your mind, yet when collected together they must certainly affect you. Besides, the Gods not only provide for mankind universally, but for particular men. You may bring the universality to gradually a smaller number, and again you may reduce that smaller number to individuals. For if the reasons which I have given prove to all of us that the Gods take care of all men, in every country, in every part of the world, separate from our continent, they take care of those who dwell on the same land with us, from east to west. And if they regard those who inhabit this kind of great island, which we call the globe of the earth, they have the like regard for those who possess the parts of this island, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and therefore they favor the parts of these parts, as Rome, Athens, Sparta, and Rhodes, and particular men of these cities, separate from the whole, as Curius, Fabricius, Coruncanius in the war with Pyrrhus, in the first Punic war, Calatinus, Duilius, Metellus, Lutatius, in the second, Maximus, Marcellus, Africanus; after these, Paulus, Gracchus, Cato; and in our fathers' times, Scipio, Laelius. Rome also and Greece have produced many illustrious men, who we cannot believe were so without the assistance of the Deity, which is the reason that the poets, Homer in particular, joined their chief heroes, Ulysses, Agamemnon, Diomedes, Achilles, to certain Deities, as companions in their adventures and dangers. Besides, the frequent appearances of the Gods, as I have before mentioned, demonstrate their regard for cities and particular men. This is also apparent indeed from the foreknowledge of events which we receive either sleeping or waking. We are likewise forewarned of many things by the entrails of victims, by presages, and many other means, which have been long observed with such exactness as to produce an art of divination. There never, therefore, was a great man without divine inspiration. If a storm should damage the corn or vineyard of a person, or any accident should deprive him of some conveniences of life, we should not judge from thence that the Deity hates or neglects him. The Gods take care of great things, and disregard the small. But to truly great men all things ever happen prosperously, as has been sufficiently asserted and proved by us Stoics, as well as by Socrates, the prince of philosophers, in his discourses on the infinite advantages arising from virtue. This is almost the whole that hath occurred to my mind on the nature of the Gods, and what I thought proper to advance. Do you, Cotta, if I may advise, defend the same cause. Remember that in Rome you keep the first rank. Remember that you are pontifex, and as your school is at liberty to argue on which side you please, do you rather take mine, and reason on it with that eloquence which you acquired by your rhetorical exercises, and which the Academy improved, for it is a pernicious and impious custom to argue against the Gods, whether it be done seriously, or only in pretense and out of sport. End of Book II. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Part I of Book III of On the Nature of the Gods, by Marcus Tullius Cicero, translated by Charles Duke Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. When Balbus had ended this discourse, then Cotta with a smile rejoined, You direct me too late which side to defend, for during the course of your argument I was revolving in my mind what objections to make to what you were saying, not so much for the sake of opposition, as of obliging you to explain what I did not perfectly comprehend. And as every one may use his own judgment, it is scarcely possible for me to think in every instance exactly what you wish. You have no idea, O Cotta, said Velleius, how impatient I am to hear what you have to say. For since our friend Balbus was highly delighted with your discourse against Epicurus, I ought in my turn to be solicitous to hear what you can say against the Stoics. And I therefore will give you my best attention, for I believe you are, as usual, well prepared for the engagement. I wish, by Hercules, I were, replies Cotta, for it is more difficult to dispute with Lucilius than it is with you. Why so? says Velleius. Because, replies Cotta, your Epicurus, in my opinion, does not contend strongly for the Gods. He only, for the sake of avoiding any unpopularity or punishment, is afraid to deny their existence. For when he asserts that the Gods are wholly inactive, and regardless of everything, and that they have limbs like ours, but make no use of them, he seems to jest with us, and to think it sufficient if he allows that there are beings of any kind, happy and eternal. But with regard to Balbus, I suppose you observed how many things were said by him, which, however false they may be, yet have a perfect coherence and connection. Therefore my design, as I said in opposing him, is not so much to confute his principles, as to induce him to explain what I do not clearly understand. For which reason, Balbus, I will give you the choice, either to answer me every particular as I go on, or permit me to proceed without interruption. If you want any explanation, replies Balbus, I would rather you would propose your doubts singly. But if your intention is rather to confute me than to seek instruction for yourself, it shall be as you please. I will either answer you immediately on every point, or stay till you have finished your discourse. Very well, says Cotta. Then let us proceed as our conversation shall direct. But before I enter on the subject, I have a word to say concerning myself. For I am greatly influenced by your authority, and your exhortation at the conclusion of your discourse, when you desired me to remember that I was Cotta and Pontifex, by which, I presume, you intimated that I should defend the sacred rites and religion and ceremonies which we received from our ancestors. Most undoubtedly I always have, and always shall defend them. Nor shall the arguments either of the learned or unlearned ever remove the opinions which I have imbibed from them concerning the worship of the immortal Gods. In matters of religion, I submit to the rules of the high priests, T. Coruncanius, P. Scipio, and P. Scaevola, not to the sentiments of Zeno, Cleanthes, or Chrysippus. And I pay a greater regard to what C. Laelius, one of our augurs and wise men, has written concerning religion in that noble oration of his, than to the most eminent of the Stoics. And as the whole religion of the Romans at first consisted in sacrifices and divination by birds, to which have since been added predictions, if the interpreters of the Sibylline oracle or the aruspices have foretold any event from portents and prodigies, I have ever thought that there was no point of all these holy things which deserved to be despised. I have been even persuaded that Romulus, by instituting divination, and Numa, by establishing sacrifices, laid the foundation of Rome, which undoubtedly would never have risen to such a height of grandeur if the Gods had not been made propitious by this worship. These, Balbus, are my sentiments, both as a priest and as Cotta. But you must bring me to your opinion by the force of your reason, for I have a right to demand from you, as a philosopher, a reason for the religion which you would have me embrace. But I must believe the religion of our ancestors without any proof. What proof, says Balbus, do you require of me? You have proposed, says Cotta, 4 articles. First of all, you undertook to prove that there are Gods. Secondly, of what kind and character they are. Thirdly, that the universe is governed by them. Lastly, that they provide for the welfare of mankind in particular. Thus, if I remember rightly, you divided your discourse. Exactly so, replies Balbus. But let us see what you require. Let us examine, says Cotta, every proposition. The first one, that there are Gods, is never contested but by the most impious of men. Nay, though it can never be rooted out of my mind, yet I believe it on the authority of our ancestors, and not on the proofs which you have brought. Why do you expect a proof from me, says Balbus, if you thoroughly believe it? Because, says Cotta, I come to this discussion as if I had never thought of the Gods, or heard anything concerning them. Take me as a disciple wholly ignorant and unbiased, and prove to me all the points which I ask. Begin then, replies Balbus. I would first know, says Cotta, why you have been so long in proving the existence of the Gods, which you said was a point so very evident to all that there was no need of any proof. In that, answers Balbus, I have followed your example, whom I have often observed when pleading in the forum to load the judge with all the arguments which the nature of your cause would permit. This also is the practice of philosophers, and I have a right to follow it. Besides, you may as well ask me why I look upon you with two eyes, since I can see you with one. You shall judge, then, yourself, says Cotta, if this is a very just comparison. For when I plead, I do not dwell upon any point agreed to be self-evident, because long reasoning only serves to confound the clearest matters. Besides, though I might take this method in pleading, yet I should not make use of it in such a discourse as this, which requires the nicest distinction. And with regard to your making use of one eye only when you look on me, there is no reason for it, since together they have the same view, and since nature, to which you attribute wisdom, has been pleased to give us two passages by which we receive light. But the truth is, that it was because you did not think that the existence of the Gods was so evident as you could wish, that you therefore brought so many proofs. It was sufficient for me to believe it on the tradition of our ancestors. And since you disregard authorities, and appeal to reason, permit my reason to defend them against yours. The proofs on which you found the existence of the Gods tend only to render a proposition doubtful that, in my opinion, is not so. I have not only retained in my memory the whole of these proofs, but even the order in which you proposed them. The first was, that when we lift up our eyes towards the heavens, we immediately conceive that there is some divinity that governs those celestial bodies, on which you quoted this passage, "Look up to the refulgent heaven above, which all men call unanimously Jove," intimating that we should invoke that as Jupiter rather than our Capitoline Jove, or that it is evident to the whole world that those bodies are Gods, which Velleius and many others do not place even in the rank of animated beings. Another strong proof in your opinion was, that the belief of the existence of the Gods was universal, and that mankind was daily more and more convinced of it. What! Should an affair of such importance be left to the decision of fools, who, by your sect especially, are called madmen? But the Gods have appeared to us, as to Postumius at the lake Regillus, and to Vatienus in the Salarian way. Something you mentioned too, I know not what, of a battle of the Locrians at Sagra. Do you believe that the Tindaridae, as you called them, that is, men sprung from men, and who were buried in Lacedaemon, as we learn from Homer, who lived in the next age, do you believe, I say, that they appeared to Vatienus on the road, mounted on white horses, without any servant to attend them, to tell the victory of the Romans to a country fellow rather than to M. Cato, who was at that time the chief person of the Senate? Do you take that print of a horse's hoof, which is now to be seen on a stone at Regillus, to be made by Castor's horse? Should you not believe, what is probable, that the souls of eminent men, such as the Tindaridae, are divine and immortal, rather than that those bodies which had been reduced to ashes should mount on horses, and fight in an army? If you say that was possible, you ought to show how it is so, and not amuse us with fabulous old women's stories. Do you take these for fabulous stories? Says Balbus. Is not the temple built by Postumius in honor of Castor and Pollux to be seen in the Forum? Is not the decree of the Senate concerning Vatienus still subsisting? As to the affair of Sagra, it is a common proverb among the Greeks, when they would affirm anything strongly, they say, "It is as certain as what passed at Sagra." Ought not such authorities to move you? You oppose me, replies Cotta, with stories, but I ask reasons of you. Footnote: some passages of the original are here wanting. Cotta continues speaking against the doctrine of the Stoics. End footnote. We are now to speak of predictions. No one can avoid what is to come, and indeed it is commonly useless to know it. For it is a miserable case to be afflicted to no purpose, and not to have even the last, the common comfort, hope, which, according to your principles, none can have. For you say that fate governs all things, and call that fate which has been true from all eternity. What advantage, then, is the knowledge of futurity to us? Or how does it assist us to guard against impending evils, since it will come inevitably? But whence comes that divination? To whom is owing that knowledge from the entrails of beasts? Who first made observations from the voice of the crow? Who invented the lots? Not that I give no credit to these things, or that I despise Attius Navius's staff, which you mentioned, but I ought to be informed how these things are understood by philosophers, especially as the diviners are often wrong in their conjectures. But physicians, you say, are likewise often mistaken. What comparison can there be between divination, of the origin of which we are ignorant, and physic, which proceeds on principles intelligible to every one? You believe that the Decii, in devoting themselves to death, appeased the gods. How great, then, was the iniquity of the gods, that they could not be appeased but at the price of such noble blood! That was the stratagem of generals, such as the Greeks call stratagema, and it was a stratagem worthy such illustrious leaders, who consulted the public good even at the expense of their lives. They conceived rightly what indeed happened, that if the general rode furiously upon the enemy, the whole army would follow his example. As to the voice of the fawns, I never heard it. If you assure me that you have, I shall believe you, though I really know not what a fawn is. I do not then, O Balbus, from anything that you have said, perceive as yet that it is proved that there are gods. I believe it indeed, but not from any arguments of the Stoics. Cleanthes, you have said, attributes the idea that men have of the gods to four causes. In the first place, as I have already sufficiently mentioned, to a foreknowledge of future events. Secondly, to tempests and other shocks of nature. Thirdly, to the utility and plenty of things we enjoy. Fourthly, to the invariable order of the stars and the heavens. The arguments drawn from foreknowledge I have already answered. With regard to tempests in the air, the sea, and the earth, I own that many people are affrighted by them, and imagine that the immortal gods are the authors of them. But the question is, not whether there are people who believe that there are gods, but whether there are gods or not. As to the two other causes of Cleanthes, one of which is derived from the great abundance of desirable things which we enjoy, the other from the invariable order of the seasons and the heavens, I shall treat on them when I answer your discourse concerning the providence of the gods, a point, Balbus, upon which you have spoken at great length. I shall likewise defer till then examining the argument which you attribute to Chrysippus, that if there is in nature anything which surpasses the power of man to produce, there must consequently be some being better than man. I shall also postpone, till we come to that part of my argument, your comparison of the world to a fine house, your observations on the proportion and harmony of the universe, and those smart, short reasons of Zeno which you quote. And I shall examine at the same time your reasons drawn from natural philosophy concerning that fiery force and that vital heat which you regard as the principle of all things. And I will investigate in its proper place all that you advanced the other day on the existence of the Gods, and on the sense and understanding which you attributed to the sun, the moon, and all the stars. And I shall ask you this question over and over again: by what proofs are you convinced yourself there are Gods? I thought, says Balbus, that I had brought ample proofs to establish this point. But such is your manner of opposing, that when you seem on the point of interrogating me, and when I am preparing to answer, you suddenly divert the discourse, and give me no opportunity to reply to you. And thus those most important points concerning divination and fate are neglected, which we Stoics have thoroughly examined, but which your school has only slightly touched upon. But they are not thought essential to the question in hand. Therefore, if you think proper, do not confuse them together, that we in this discussion may come to a clear explanation of the subject of our present inquiry. Very well, says Cotta. Since then you have divided the whole question into 4 parts, and I have said all that I had to say on the first, I will take the second into consideration, in which, when you attempted to show what the character of the Gods was, you seemed to me rather to prove that there are none. For you said that it was the greatest difficulty to draw our minds from the prepossessions of the eyes, but that as nothing is more excellent than the Deity, you did not doubt that the world was God, because there is nothing better in nature than the world. And so we may reasonably think it animated, or rather perceive it in our minds as clearly as if it were obvious to our eyes. Now, in what sense do you say there is nothing better than the world? If you mean that there is nothing more beautiful, I agree with you. That there is nothing more adapted to our wants, I likewise agree with you. But if you mean that nothing is wiser than the world, I am by no means of your opinion. Not that I find it difficult to conceive anything in my mind independent of my eyes. On the contrary, the more I separate my mind from my eyes, the less I am able to comprehend your opinion. Nothing is better than the world, you say. Nor is there, indeed, anything on earth better than the city of Rome. Do you think, therefore, that our city has a mind, that it thinks and reasons, or that this most beautiful city, being void of sense, is not preferable to an ant, because an ant has sense, understanding, reason, and memory? You should consider, Balbus, what ought to be allowed you, and not advance things because they please you. For that old, concise, and, as it seemed to you, acute syllogism of Zeno has been all which you have so much enlarged upon in handling this topic. That which reasons is superior to that which does not. Nothing is superior to the world, therefore the world reasons. If you would prove also that the world can very well read a book, follow the example of Zeno, and say, that which can read is better than that which cannot. Nothing is better than the world. The world, therefore, can read. After the same manner, you may prove the world to be an orator, a mathematician, a musician, that it possesses all sciences, and, in short, is a philosopher. You have often said that God made all things, and that no cause can produce an effect unlike itself. From hence it will follow, not only that the world is animated, and is wise, but also plays upon the fiddle and the flute, because it produces men who play on those instruments. Zeno, therefore, the chief of your sect, advances no argument sufficient to induce us to think that the world reasons, or indeed that it is animated at all, and consequently none to think it a Deity. Though it may be said that there is nothing superior to it, as there is nothing more beautiful, nothing more useful to us, nothing more adorned, and nothing more regular in its motions. But if the world, considered as one great whole, is not God, you should not surely deify, as you have done, that infinite multitude of stars which only form a part of it, and which so delight you with the regularity of their eternal courses. Not but that there is something truly wonderful and incredible in their regularity, but this regularity of motion, Balbus, may as well be ascribed to a natural as to a divine cause. What can be more regular than the flux and reflux of the Euripus at Chalcis, the Sicilian sea, and the violence of the ocean in those parts? Where the rapid tide does Europe from the Libyan coast divide. The same appears on the Spanish and British coasts. Must we conclude that some deity appoints and directs these ebbings and flowings to certain fixed times? Consider, I pray, if everything which is regular in its motion is deemed divine, whether it will not follow that tertian and quartan aegues must likewise be so, as their returns have the greatest regularity. These effects are to be explained by reason, but because you are unable to assign any, you have recourse to a deity as your last refuge. The arguments of Chrysippus appeared to you of great weight. A man undoubtedly of great quickness and subtlety (I call those quick who have a sprightly turn of thought, and those subtle whose minds are seasoned by use as their hands are by labor). If, says he, there is anything which is beyond the power of man to produce, the being who produces it is better than man. Man is unable to make what is in the world. The being, therefore, that could do it is superior to man. What being is there but a God superior to man? Therefore there is a God. These arguments are founded on the same erroneous principles as Zeno's. For he does not define what is meant by being better or more excellent, or distinguish between an intelligent cause and a natural cause. Chrysippus adds, If there are no Gods, there is nothing better than man. But we cannot, without the highest arrogance, have this idea of ourselves. Let us grant that it is arrogance in man to think himself better than the world. But to comprehend that he has understanding and reason, and that in Orion and Canicula there is neither, is no arrogance, but an indication of good sense. Since we suppose, continues he, when we see a beautiful house, that it was built for the master, and not for mice, we should likewise judge that the world is the mansion of the Gods. Yes, if I believe that the Gods built the world, but not if, as I believe and intend to prove, it is the work of nature. Socrates, in Xenophon, asks, Whence had man his understanding, if there was none in the world? And I ask, Whence had we speech, harmony, singing, unless we think it is the sun conversing with the moon when she approaches near it, or that the world forms an harmonious concert, as Pythagoras imagines? This, Balbus, is the effect of nature, not of that nature which proceeds artificially, as Zeno says, and the character of which I shall presently examine into, but a nature which, by its own proper motions and mutations, modifies everything. For I readily agree to what you said about the harmony and general agreement of nature, which you pronounce to be firmly bound and united together, as it were by ties of blood. But I do not approve of what you added, that it could not possibly be so unless it were so united by one divine spirit. On the contrary, the whole subsists by the power of nature independently of the Gods, and there is a kind of sympathy, as the Greeks call it, which joins together all the parts of the universe. And the greater that is in its own power, the less is it necessary to have recourse to a divine intelligence. But how will you get rid of the objections which Carneades made? If, says he, there is no body immortal, there is none eternal. But there is no body immortal, nor even indivisible, or that cannot be separated and disunited. And as every animal is in its nature passive, so there is not one which is not subject to the impressions of extraneous bodies. None, that is to say, which can avoid the necessity of enduring and suffering. And if every animal is mortal, there is none immortal. So, likewise, if every animal may be cut up and divided, there is none indivisible, none eternal, but all are liable to be affected by and compelled to submit to external power. Every animal, therefore, is necessarily mortal, dissoluble, and divisible. For as there is no wax, no silver, no brass, which cannot be converted into something else, whatever is composed of wax, or silver, or brass, may cease to be what it is. By the same reason, if all the elements are mutable, every body is mutable. Now, according to your doctrine, all the elements are mutable. All bodies, therefore, are mutable. But if there were any body immortal, then all bodies would not be mutable. Every body, then, is mortal, for every body is either water, air, fire, or earth, or composed of the four elements together, or of some of them. Now, there is not one of all these elements that does not perish. For earthly bodies are fragile. Water is so soft that the least shock will separate its parts, and fire and air yield to the least impulse, and are subject to dissolution. Besides, any of these elements perish when converted into another nature, as when water is formed from earth, the air from water, and the sky from air, and when they change in the same manner back again. Therefore, if there is nothing but what is perishable in the composition of all animals, there is no animal eternal. But, not to insist on these arguments, there is no animal to be found that had not a beginning and will not have an end. For every animal being sensitive, they are consequently all sensible of cold and heat, sweet and bitter, nor can they have pleasing sensations without being subject to the contrary. As, therefore, they receive pleasure, they likewise receive pain, and whatever being is subject to pain must necessarily be subject to death. It must be allowed, therefore, that every animal is mortal. Besides, a being that is not sensible of pleasure or pain cannot have the essence of an animal. If, then, on the one hand, every animal must be sensible of pleasure and pain, and if, on the other, every being that has these sensations cannot be immortal, we may conclude that as there is no animal insensible, there is none immortal. Besides, there is no animal without inclination and aversion. An inclination to that which is agreeable to nature, and an aversion to the contrary. There are, in the case of every animal, some things which they covet, and others they reject. What they reject are repugnant to their nature, and consequently would destroy them. Every animal, therefore, is inevitably subject to be destroyed. There are innumerable arguments to prove that whatever is sensitive is perishable, for cold, heat, pleasure, pain, and all that affects the sense, when they become excessive, cause destruction. Since, then, there is no animal that is not sensitive, there is none immortal. The substance of an animal is either simple or compound. Simple, if it is composed only of earth, of fire, of air, or of water, and of such a sort of being we can form no idea. Compound, if it is formed of different elements, which have each their proper situation, and have a natural tendency to it. This element tending towards the highest parts, that towards the lowest, and another towards the middle. This conjunction may for some time subsist, but not forever, for every element must return to its first situation. No animal, therefore, is eternal. But your school, Balbus, allows fire only to be the sole active principle, an opinion which I believe you derive from Heraclitus, whom some men understand in one sense, some in another. But since he seems unwilling to be understood, we will pass him by. You Stoics, then, say that fire is the universal principle of all things, that all living bodies cease to live on the extinction of that heat, and that throughout all nature, whatever is sensible of that heat lives and flourishes. Now, I cannot conceive that bodies should perish for want of heat, rather than for want of moisture or air, especially as they even die through excess of heat, so that the life of animals does not depend more on fire than on the other elements. However, air and water have this quality in common with fire and heat. But let us see to what this tends. If I am not mistaken, you believe that in all nature there is nothing but fire which is self-animated. Why fire rather than air, of which the life of animals consists, and which is called from thence anima, the soul? But how is it that you take it for granted that life is nothing but fire? It seems more probable that it is a compound of fire and air. But if fire is self-animated, unmixed with any other element, it must be sensitive, because it renders our bodies sensitive. And the same objection which I just now made will arise, that whatever is sensitive must necessarily be susceptible of pleasure and pain, and whatever is sensible of pain is likewise subject to the approach of death. Therefore, you cannot prove fire to be eternal. You Stoics hold that all fire has need of nourishment, without which it cannot possibly subsist; that the sun, moon, and all the stars are fed either with fresh or salt waters; and the reason that Cleanthes gives why the sun is retrograde, and does not go beyond the tropics in the summer or winter, is that he may not be too far from his sustenance. This I shall fully examine hereafter, but at present we may conclude that whatever may cease to be cannot of its own nature be eternal; that if fire wants sustenance, it will cease to be, and that, therefore, fire is not of its own nature eternal. After all, what kind of a deity must that be who is not graced with one single virtue, if we should succeed in forming this idea of such a one? Must we not attribute prudence to a deity, a virtue which consists in the knowledge of things good, bad, and indifferent? Yet what need has a being for the discernment of good and ill, who neither has nor can have any ill? Of what use is reason to him? Of what use is understanding? We men, indeed, find them useful to aid us in finding out things which are obscure by those which are clear to us; but nothing can be obscure to a deity. As to justice, which gives to every one his own, it is not the concern of the Gods, since that virtue, according to your doctrine, received its birth from men, and from civil society. Temperance consists in abstinence from corporeal pleasures, and if such abstinence hath a place in heaven, so also must the pleasures abstained from. Lastly, if fortitude is ascribed to the Deity, how does it appear? In afflictions? In labor? In danger? None of these things can affect a God. How then can we conceive this to be a Deity that makes no use of reason, and is not endowed with any virtue? However, when I consider what is advanced by the Stoics, my contempt for the ignorant multitude vanishes, for these are their divinities. The Syrians worshipped a fish. The Egyptians consecrated beasts of almost every kind. The Greeks deified many men, as Alabandos at Alabanda, Tennis at Tenedos, and all Greece paid divine honors to Leucothea, who was before called Ino, to her son Palaemon, to Hercules, to Aesculapius, and to the Tyndaridae. Our own people to Romulus, and to many others who, as citizens newly admitted into the ancient body, they imagine have been received into heaven. These are the gods of the illiterate. What are the notions of you philosophers? In what respect are they superior to these ideas? I shall pass them over, for they are certainly very admirable. Let the world, then, be a Deity, for that, I conceive, is what you mean by "the refulgent heaven above, which all men call unanimously Jove." But why are we to add many more gods? What a multitude of them there is! At least it seems so to me, for every constellation, according to you, is a Deity. To some you give the name of beasts, as the goat, the scorpion, the bull, the lion; to others the names of inanimate things, as the ship, the altar, the crown. But supposing these were to be allowed, how can the rest be granted, or even so much as understood? When we call corn Ceres, and wine Bacchus, we make use of the common manner of speaking. But do you think any one so mad as to believe that his food is a Deity? With regard to those who, you say, from having been men, became Gods, I should be very willing to learn of you either how it was possible formerly, or, if it had ever been, why is it not so now? I do not conceive, as things are at present, how Hercules "burned with fiery torches on Mount Eta," as Accius says, should rise with the flames "to the eternal mansions of his father." Besides, Homer also says that Ulysses met him in the shades below, among the other dead. But yet I should be glad to know which Hercules we should chiefly worship; for they who have searched into those histories, which are but little known, tell us of several. The most ancient is he who fought with Apollo about the Tripos of Delphi, and is son of Jupiter and Lisyto, and of the most ancient Jupiters too, for we find many Jupiters also in the Grecian chronicles. The second is the Egyptian Hercules, and is believed to be the son of Nilus, and to be the author of the Phrygian characters. The third, to whom they offered sacrifices, is one of the Idae Dactyli. The fourth is the son of Jupiter and Asteria, the sister of Latona, chiefly honored by the Tyrians, who pretend that Carthago is his daughter. The fifth, called Belus, is worshipped in India. The sixth is the son of Alcmena by Jupiter, but by the third Jupiter, for there are many Jupiters, as you shall soon see. Since this examination has led me so far, I will convince you that in matters of religion I have learned more from the pontifical rites, the customs of our ancestors, and the vessels of Numa, which Laelius mentions in his little golden oration, than from all the learning of the Stoics. For tell me, if I were a disciple of your school, what answer could I make to these questions? If there are Gods, are nymphs also Goddesses? If they are Goddesses, are Pans and Satyrs in the same rank? But they are not. Consequently, nymphs are not Goddesses. Yet they have temples publicly dedicated to them. What do you conclude from thence? Others who have temples are not therefore Gods. But let us go on. You call Jupiter and Neptune Gods. Their brother Pluto, then, is one. And if so, those rivers also are deities, which they say flow in the infernal regions. Acheron, Cocytus, Pyriphlegethon, Charon also, and Cerberus are Gods. But that cannot be allowed, nor can Pluto be placed among the deities. What then will you say of his brothers? Thus reasons Carneades, not with any design to destroy the existence of the Gods, for what would less become a philosopher, but to convince us that on that matter the Stoics have said nothing plausible. If, then, Jupiter and Neptune are Gods, adds he, can that divinity be denied to their father Saturn, who is principally worshipped throughout the West? If Saturn is a God, then must his father Coelus be one too, and so must the parents of Coelus, which are the sky and day, as also their brothers and sisters, which by ancient genealogists are thus named love, deceit, fear, labor, envy, fate, old age, death, darkness, misery, lamentation, favor, fraud, obstinacy, the destinies, the Hesperides, and dreams, all which are the offspring of Erebus and night. These monstrous deities, therefore, must be received, or else those from whom they sprung must be disallowed. If you say that Apollo, Vulcan, Mercury, and the rest of that sort are Gods, can you doubt the divinity of Hercules and Aesculapius, Bacchus, Castor, and Pollux? These are worshipped as much as those, and even more in some places. Therefore they must be numbered among the Gods, though on the mother's side they are only of mortal race. Aristaeus, who is said to have been the son of Apollo, and to have found out the art of making oil from the olive, Theseus, the son of Neptune, and the rest whose fathers were deities, shall they not be placed in the number of the Gods? But what think you of those whose mothers were Goddesses? They surely have a better title to divinity, for in the civil law, as he is a free man who is born of a free woman, so in the law of nature, he whose mother is a Goddess must be a God. The isle Astypalia religiously honor Achilles, and if he is a deity, Orpheus and Rhesus are so, who were born of one of the Muses, unless perhaps there may be a privilege belonging to sea marriages, which land marriages have not. Orpheus and Rhesus are nowhere worshipped, and if they are therefore not Gods, because they are nowhere worshipped as such, how can the others be deities? You, Balbus, seemed to agree with me that the honors which they received were not from their being regarded as immortals, but as men richly endued with virtue. But if you think Latona a Goddess, how can you avoid admitting Hecate to be one also, who was the daughter of Asteria, Latona's sister? Certainly she is one, if we may judge by the altars erected to her in Greece. And if Hecate is a Goddess, how can you refuse that rank to the Eumenides? for they also have a temple at Athens, and, if I understand right, the Romans have consecrated a grove to them. The Furies, too, whom we look upon as the inspectors into and scourges of impiety, I suppose, must have their divinity too. As you hold that there is some divinity which presides over every human affair, there is one who presides over the travail of matrons, whose name, Natio, is derived a nascentibus from nativities, and to whom we used to sacrifice in our processions in the fields of Ardea. But if she is a deity, we must likewise acknowledge all those you mentioned: honor, faith, intellect, concord; by the same rule also, hope, Juno, Moneta, and every idle phantom, every child of our imagination, are deities. But as this consequence is quite inadmissible, do not you either defend the cause from which it flows. What say you to this? If these are deities which we worship and regard as such, why are not Serapis and Isis placed in the same rank? And if they are admitted, what reason have we to reject the gods of the barbarians? Thus we should deify oxen, horses, the ibis, hawks, asps, crocodiles, fishes, dogs, wolves, cats, and many other beasts. If we go back to the source of this superstition, we must equally condemn all the deities from which they proceed. Shall Ino, whom the Greeks call Leucothea, and we Matuta, be reputed a goddess because she was the daughter of Cadmus? And shall that title be refused to Circe and Pasiphae, who had the sun for their father, and Perses, daughter of the ocean, for their mother? It is true, Circe has divine honors paid her by our colony of Circaeum, therefore you call her a goddess. But what will you say of Medea, the granddaughter of the sun and the ocean, and daughter of Aeetes and Idea? What will you say of her brother Apsyrtos, whom Paeanius calls Aegialeus, though the other name is more frequent in the writings of the ancients? If you did not deify one as well as the other, what will become of Ino? For all these deities have the same origin. Shall Amphiaraus and Trophonios be called gods? Our publicans, when some lands in Boeotia were exempted from the tax, as belonging to the immortal gods, denied that any were immortal who had been men. But if you deify these, Erechtheus surely is a god, whose temple and priest we have seen at Athens. And can you, then, refuse to acknowledge also Codrus, and many others who shed their blood for the preservation of their country? And if it is not allowable to consider all these men as gods, then certainly probabilities are not in favor of our acknowledging the divinity of those previously mentioned beings from whom these have proceeded. It is easy to observe, likewise, that if in many countries people have paid divine honors to the memory of those who have signalized their courage, it was done in order to animate others to practice virtue, and to expose themselves the more willingly to dangers in their country's cause. From this motive the Athenians have deified Erechtheus and his daughters, and have erected also a temple called Leocorion to the daughters of Leos. Alabandos is more honored in the city which he founded than any of the more illustrious deities. From thence Stratonicus had a pleasant turn, as he had many, when he was troubled with an impertinent fellow who insisted that Alabandos was a god, but that Hercules was not. Very well, says he, then let the anger of Alabandos fall upon me, and that of Hercules upon you. do you not consider, Balbus, to what lengths your arguments for the divinity of the heaven and the stars will carry you? You deify the sun and the moon, which the Greeks take to be Apollo and Diana. If the moon is a deity, the morning star, the other planets, and all the fixed stars are also deities. And why shall not the rainbow be placed in that number? For it is so wonderfully beautiful that it is justly said to be the daughter of Thaumas. But if you deify the rainbow, what regard will you pay to the clouds? For the colors which appear in the bow are only formed of the clouds, one of which is said to have brought forth the Centaurs. And if you deify the clouds, you cannot pay less regard to the seasons, which the Roman people have really consecrated. Tempests, showers, storms, and whirlwinds must then be deities. It is certain, at least, that our captains used to sacrifice a victim to the waves before they embarked on any voyage. As you deify the earth under the name of Ceres, because, as you said, she bears fruit a gerendo, and the ocean under that of Neptune, rivers and fountains have the same right. Thus we see that Maso, the conqueror of Corsica, dedicated a temple to a fountain, and the names of the Tiber, Spino, Almo, Nodinus, and other neighboring rivers are in the prayers of the augurs. Therefore, either the number of such deities will be infinite, or we must admit none of them, and wholly disapprove of such an endless series of superstition. None of all these assertions, then, are to be admitted. I must proceed now, Balbus, to answer those who say that, with regard to those deified mortals, so religiously and devoutly reverenced, the public opinion should have the force of reality. To begin, then, they who are called theologists say that there are 3 Jupiters, the first and second of whom were born in Arcadia, one of whom was the son of Ether and father of Proserpine and Bacchus, the other the son of Coelus and father of Minerva, who is called the goddess and inventress of war, the third one born of Saturn in the Isle of Crete, where his sepulchre is shown. The sons of Jupiter, Dioscuri, also, among the Greeks have many names. First, the 3 who at Athens have the title of Anactes, Tritopatrios, Eubulios, and Dionysus, sons of the most ancient king, Jupiter, and Proserpine. The next are Castor and Pollux, sons of the 3rd Jupiter and Leda, and lastly 3 others, by some called Alca, Melampus, and Tamalos, sons of Atreus, the son of Pelops. As to the Muses, there were at first 4, Thelxinae, Aeide, Archae, and Melide, daughters of the 2nd Jupiter. Afterward there were 9 daughters of the 3rd Jupiter and Mnemosyne. There were also 9 others having the same appellations, born of Pyros and Antiope, by the poets usually called Peerides and Pieria. Though Sol the sun is so called, you say, because he is solus, single, yet how many sons do theologists mention? There is one, the son of Jupiter and grandson of Ether; another, the son of Hyperion; a third, who the Egyptians say was of the city Heliopolis, sprung from Vulcan, the son of Nilus; a fourth is said to have been born at Rhodes of Acantho, in the times of the heroes, and was the grandfather of Chalicis, Camairos, and Lindos; a fifth, of whom it is pretended Aretes and Circe were born at Chalcis. There are likewise several Vulcans. The first, who had of Minerva that Apollo whom the ancient historians call the tutelary god of Athens, was the son of Coelus. The second, whom the Egyptians call Opas, and whom they looked upon as the protector of Egypt, is the son of Nilus. The third, who is said to have been the master of forges at Lemnos, was the son of the third Jupiter and of Juno. The fourth, who possessed the islands near Sicily called Vulcanii, was the son of Menelaus. One Mercury had Coelus for his father, and Dies for his mother. Another, who is said to dwell in a cavern, and is the same as Trophonios, is the son of Valens and Phoronis. A third, of whom, and of Penelope, Pan was the offspring, is the son of the third Jupiter and Maia. A fourth, whom the Egyptians think it a crime to name, is the son of Nilus. A fifth, whom we call in their language Thoth, as with them the first month of the year is called, is he whom the people of Phenium worship, and who is said to have killed Argus, to have fled for it into Egypt, and to have given laws and learning to the Egyptians. The first of the Aesculapiae, the god of Arcadia, who is said to have invented the probe, and to have been the first person who taught men to use bandages for wounds, is the son of Apollo. The second, who was killed with thunder, and is said to be buried in Cynosra, is the brother of the second Mercury. The third, who is said to have found out the art of purging the stomach, and of drawing teeth, is the son of Arsippus and Arsinoe. And in Arcadia there is shown his tomb, and the wood which is consecrated to him, near the river Lucium. I have already spoken of the most ancient of the Apollos, who is the son of Vulcan, and tutelar god of Athens. There is another, son of Corybas, and native of Crete, for which island he is said to have contended with Jupiter himself. A third, who came from the regions of the Hyperboreae to Delphi, is the son of the third Jupiter and of Latona. A fourth was of Arcadia, whom the Arcadians called Nomio, because they regarded him as their legislator. There are likewise many Dianas. The first, who is thought to be the mother of the winged Cupid, is the daughter of Jupiter and Proserpine. The second, who is more known, is daughter of the third Jupiter and of Latona. The third, whom the Greeks often call by her father's name, is the daughter of Apis and Glauce. There are many also of the Dionysi. The first was the son of Jupiter and Proserpine. The second, who is said to have killed Nysa, was the son of Nilus. The third, who reigned in Asia, and for whom the Sabazdia were instituted, was the son of Caprios. The fourth, for whom they celebrate the Orphic festivals, sprung from Jupiter and Luna. The fifth, who is supposed to have instituted the Triateridae, was the son of Nisus and Thyone. The first Venus, who has a temple at Elis, was the daughter of Coelus and Dies. The second arose out of the froth of the sea, and became by Mercury the mother of the second Cupid. The third, the daughter of Jupiter and Diana, was married to Vulcan, but is said to have had Anteros by Mars. The fourth was a Syrian, born of Tiro, who is called Astarte, and is said to have been married to Adonis. I have already mentioned one Minerva, mother of Apollo. Another, who is worshipped at Sais, a city in Egypt, sprung from Nilus. The third, whom I have also mentioned, was daughter of Jupiter. The fourth sprung from Jupiter and Corype, the daughter of the ocean. The Arcadians call her Coria, and make her the inventress of chariots. A fifth, whom they paint with wings at her heels, was daughter of Pallas, and is said to have killed her father for endeavoring to violate her chastity. The first Cupid is said to be the son of Mercury and the first Diana. the second of Mercury and the second Venus, the third, who is the same as Anteros, of Mars and the third Venus. All these opinions arise from old stories that were spread in Greece, the belief in which, Balbus, you well know, ought to be stopped, lest religion should suffer. But you Stoics, so far from refuting them, even give them authority by the mysterious sense which you pretend to find in them. Can you, then, think, after this plain refutation, that there is need to employ more subtle reasonings? But to return from this digression. End of Part I. of Book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.